Hello, and welcome to another live stream. Um, so, we're going to talk philosophy today, but let's just give people a little bit of time to connect and get on and confirm that, in fact, they can hear me and see me and do all of those kinds of things. um, I hope. So, I had a thought that amused me today. I was busy making preserved meat, which is a thing that I do. I make a preserved meat called biltong, which is basically where you soak meat in vinegar and soy sauce and a couple of things like that, and then you wind dry it, and you use a lot of coriander. So I was doing that, and then I've recently started brewing. So I brew mead, and I was like checking out my mead and my drying uh, meat, and I was like, I would I would probably be an asset when the zombie apocalypse comes because I can like dry meat and brew beer and shit like that, which I thought was like very amusing to myself quietly about the skills that I have that would be useful in a zombie apocalypse. So let me know in the chat what skills you have that would be useful in a zombie apocalypse, and how you would set about surviving in that dire calamity. Um, yeah. So I'm assuming that everyone can hear me. I do see a couple of people in chat. I'm assuming that you would say that, like, if you couldn't hear me. Um, and Today's topic is an interesting one because it is about philosophy in world building. So there's actually two angles from which to look at philosophy in world building. And the one is from your thematic angle, from the angle in which you plan to tell the story, right? And your other angle is your in world philosophy. So we'll talk about both in this stream. But first, right now, we are listing the skills that we have that would be relevant in a zombie apocalypse. So, what skills do you have that would be relevant in a zombie apocalypse? I can hunt, make, I can preserve meat, and I can ferment honey to make mead and wheat to make beer. Um, Elizabeth can and crochet, which are both incredibly useful skills. Like, I am useless with a crocheting needle. I can knit, but only the basic like stitch. I only learned ever to do the really basic stitch on a with knitting needles. My crocheting was never good. My grandmother tried to teach me, but I was useless at it. I don't know why. I just really struggled with a crocheting needle. Okay, so zombie skills. Put your zombie skills in the chat. Um, or your rather not your zombie skills, your skills for surviving the zombie apocalypse. So if we think about philosophy in terms of the impact that it has on your way that you think about your world building, right? So from a meta perspective first, we'll get to in-world philosophy. But from a meta perspective, you're looking at people like Ursula Le Guin, right? And the kind of worlds that she built. Or if you want to talk about like classic philosophers, the Russian guy. I swear I can pronounce his name. Dostoevsky. Maybe. um, hello, hello to our new Build It in Straw member. Welcome to the Just in Timer Club. Um, so Dostoevsky wrote novels, right? As did Camus. Now, Camus is one of my favorite philosophers. I really love a lot of his philosophical writings, but he would have called himself a novelist, not a philosopher, right? His Books were novels that espoused a certain philosophy, that asked thematic questions. And in our genre, in the speculative fiction genre, the writers who write like that are Ursula Le Guin in the fantasy side, Isaac Asimov on the science fiction side. Um, those are the 2 that spring to mind immediately. Man, there was a short story. I don't know if anybody in the chat knows it. It was an insane short story. It was a hard science fiction story, and one of the point of view characters is an equation trying to become sentient. And this equation keeps trying to crawl up the sides of like a container, like a virtual container. And then, it gets washed away as the memory of the computer it's in gets destroyed. And then it turns out that the equation had killed the scientist that invented it. And there was a human scientist trying to figure out like what was going on with this equation. And that was a very kind of philosophical, thematic question about what is life and do we blame unconscious things for their morality and so on. It was an insane short story. But so these kinds of writers write their stories and build their worlds to ask thematic questions. Now, do not misunderstand me here. Almost all writers, in fact, all writers have themes. Okay. Even if their themes are basic ones like good beats evil, or being a nice person is better than being a nasty person, or having bigger explosions, will let you win fights, whatever. Like everybody has a theme in their content. But writers who are also writing to address a philosophical point, that theme is much more clear and much more embedded in their world as well. So I'll give you an example. Camus is wrote the novel The Stranger, where the hero of the novel, right, is indifferent to the world. He's like, nothing matters. Okay. Life has no meaning. And in the long run, nothing matters. And because of that, he has no morality. He runs around like there's a murder, and so on. And in the end, he's executed and he's still like, it doesn't matter. Life doesn't have a meaning. And that is kind of one of the kind of principles of absurdism, which is Camus' philosophy. It's like life has no point, and there is a tension within us because we want life to have a point. That is the tension that we live with as humans, and that is what he explored in his books. And so he built this world and wrote the story that is very deeply embedded around that question, right? And answering that question takes precedence over things like tension or story, like all of these things are of lesser importance than addressing the core question of the theme. Um, in Ursula Le Guin's Those Who Walk Away from Omelos, her essay on that, which is based on the Russian guy, Dos no, the Russian guy. Anyway, it's based on the Russian guy's scapegoat, right? So it's inspired by. Um, so he wrote this book about the brothers Karamazov, who one of the questions that they discuss is whether it is worth it to sacrifice an innocent for the good of the many. And Ursula Le Guin did that as well in Those Who Walk Away from Omelos, right? Where there's this city that is absolute, it's a utopia. It's everybody has enough to eat, everybody can do what they like, everybody's free, it's wonderful, right? But in order to maintain it as such, they take a child and that child is kept in a cellar, and the child is never shown love. The child is never hugged or taught to be a human at all or anything like that. They're just food is just shoved under the door for them. And every person in Omelas has to face this reality. They have to look at that child and say, yes, it is acceptable that we do this to this one child in return for the rest of our city being a utopia. Right? So it's a very central, like, is scapegoating valid? And those who refuse to accept, to put the child into the situation, they walk away from Omelas. They walk away from utopia. And it's very important that this is a child. This is not somebody who is choosing to sacrifice. This is somebody that society is sacrificing. Like, see, that's the difference there. So um, so that's what it means to write a philosophy novel, if all that makes sense. I hope all that is making sense to everyone. Let me take a look at some zombie skills. Werby says, he can DM RPGs. Yeah, people do need to do something. Like, being able to run make-believe games is a good way. Heather Ann, wow, Heather Ann is an asset. Weaving, spinning, knitting, sewing, some leatherworking, canning, cooking over a fire, baking bread, butter and cheese making. Huh, I'm picking you. um, Elliot is some tracking and hunting, marksmanship and hand loading. Hand loading's a really important skill because, like, you're gonna have guns, but bullets might be hard to get hold of. Map reading, uh, yeah, so I guess Elliot is like our ranger. Uh, Fishing and building, those are good skills. Those are good skills. Um, I will get Saint Sir Nicholas to where JRRT, GRM, and JKR fit in with, like, their philosophical questions in a moment. Um, I've never read Stanislaw Lem, but my sci-fi isn't as widely read as my fantasy. I've read way more fantasy than sci-fi. Um, Dostoevsky. Thank you, Organ-Dray. I swear, sometimes, like, I can pronounce it, and sometimes I'm just like, there is no chance. Like, he's just the Russian guy. Um, and sacrifice of the innocent is yeah. Um, yeah. So the thing about The Stranger, um, I have not seen Janae's collects voiceover of the text post called "Those Who Walk into Omelas." I will look that up because I think about Omelas a lot. Like, it's one of the philosophy questions that haunt me. Like, if it is truly a utopia, is it worth it? Like, it is a haunting question. Um, I want to say no, and at the same time, it's a lot of people to say no to, you know? Like, it's a haunting question. And the thing about absurdism, Wu Wei, is, yeah, people look at absurdism and think that it's nihilism. I don't subscribe to that, but I understand how people get there. Um, I like absurdism for its acknowledgement of, like, maybe life just does not have a point. Maybe there is no purpose other than our genes surviving. And that's okay. Peace needs to be made with that. But that doesn't mean that our lives here, the lives we live, are without meaning, because we still live here. Like, we still impact other people. We still matter to each other. We just don't matter on a grand universe scale. Anyway, so those those kind of philosophical books focus very much on, like, the thematic philosophical questions, and they normally address, like, fairly big questions, like the scapegoating question, or the does life have meaning question, or does it matter if you're moral? if life has no meaning, does morality exist? Those kinds of, like, big, big, big questions. Um, Now, many other writers have themes. Okay, so let's talk about George R. R. Martin, for example, because Saint Sir Nicholas threw that in there. And he's actually a very interesting case because George R. R. Martin, like um, Dune, Herbert, like Herbert before him, writes with a theme of political systemic critique. Right? Now, the thing is, they do focus on tension and character and all of those things. So many of the readers that the kind of this the critique in their books kind of like shoot straight past people, right? And that's not those people's fault. Like, I'm not saying like everybody has to read with this, like, you know, flowers in your hair, kind of looking for meaning in every word. Sometimes the goddamn curtains are just blue, you know. Um, like this thing behind me isn't blue for any particular reason. It's blue because I liked the picture when I saw it. Like, and I wanted a tapestry type thing to break the white of the walls. Like, it's nothing more than that. But if you look at both Herbert and at George R. R. Martin, you can very clearly see the systemic critiques that they put into their politics, right? So if we look at Ned's death, for example, in a Game of Thrones, the first book of A Song of Ice and Fire, Ned is a good, honorable man who is trying to do the right thing. But the government that he operates in, the institutions that he operates in, does not reward good, honorable men. It punishes good, honorable men. Who succeeds in this environment? Tywin Lannister, Robert Baratheon to a certain extent, Cersei, Jaime. The people who succeed are not the honorable people. Barristan Selmy does not succeed. Ned Stark does not succeed, right? And that's so he writes. So GRRM writes a political systemic critique. Same with Dune. Okay, so Dune's message is actually be wary of savior characters. Savior characters will lead you down the garden path to hell. Put not your faith in saviors, right? That's kind of the core message of Dune, and that's also why the later novels feel so different from the first novel, because Herbert wrote the first novel and everybody was like, "Yay, Paul's the hero," and Herbert was like, "No, what's wrong with you people?" um, so that's that's what they do. By J.K. or do you mean Rowling, as in Harry Potter? I, Harry Potter is a coming of age story. I I don't know. Like, she has themes in there, right? She's got themes around friendship and so on. But I don't know that she is writing like on a systemic philosophical level. I don't think she has like a defined teleology, basically. God, sorry, I sound like a freaking educated La La Land person. I don't think she has a defined system behind her thematic writing. Um, um, So, Wirbis, I don't agree with you about Stark at all, because Robb Stark in the end um, failed. Like there's just it becomes so much about the systems and who survives those systems. But I mean, one can debate these things from top to bottom, like, without hearing it from the horse's mouth. And we don't actually want to hear it from the horse's mouth. The debate is part of the fun, right? And that's the other thing that is important to remember, right? Is people disagree about philosophy, and that is 100% okay. What I take out of a book isn't what you take out of a book, right? Um, Even Camus' The Stranger, like Organdre is in the comments saying, absurdism is how I found peace from nihilism. Same, same, right? Absurdism is what gave me peace in approaching life. But that's not what everybody takes out of it, so what you take out of it is what you take out of it. Um, what I took out of A Song of Ice and Fire is a critique of the political system where your your right to govern is determined by bloodline and military might. But neither of those two things actually help you govern. Neither of those two things make you good at governance. And that creates a deep inherent tension in the whole setup of feudalism, where you've got mighty warriors who are now in charge of putting together logistics for farmlands, and creating laws that bring justice for all and so on. And that's one of the things where I think Robert Baratheon is a very direct critique of that, in that he won. He successfully overthrew um, our boy Arais, and ascended to the Iron Throne. But Robert Baratheon was a terrible king, right? He had no interest in governing, in the actual mechanics of running a kingdom, which is very different from winning a throne. And that creates a lot of inherent political philosophy tension, that need to win the throne versus the ability to govern. So, and so it becomes a very interesting, like, look at at feudalism. I would say that as a whole, Martin looks at feudalism and at the political philosophy behind it, and that drives a lot of his themes. Um, yeah. Or alternate explanation, Rob Stark failed because GRM fudged the dice rolls. Man, I would never want I would never want GRRM to be my DM. You'd be like, I walk down the stairs. He'd be like, roll dexterity or die. It's like you slip on like a piece of soap someone left there and tumble head over heels down the stairs and break your neck. New character. Um, but but for sure, it like and but this is the thing, right? The very disagreement that Werbis and I are having, and we're having it with me at a little bit of an unfair advantage because I can talk and he can only type. But the very disagreement we're having shows the essence of having a a strong thematic element in your books. A strong thematic element gets people arguing about your themes, arguing about what the story means to them, right? And that is good. These kinds of discussions, bring up new ideas, build out our philosophical and moral and political frameworks and all of those good things. So, long story short, okay, there are different kinds of philosophy, and they inspire different themes on this meta uh, on this meta level. Okay, so there is the existential philosophy that we spoke about with Camus and those guys. That would be people like Nietzsche and people who ask questions like, "What is the meaning of life?" There is moral philosophy, right? So Kierkegaard is often classified as a moral philosopher, but he is also an existentialist. The two aren't they're actually quite good friends, moral philosophy. So I would say that omelas, those who walk away from omelas, is a moral philosophy, right? So that is a theme inspired by moral philosophy. Then you have um, your philosophies like your I don't know exactly what to call them. Things like friendship is important and don't seek power. I guess they're kind of moral philosophy-ish. They're very, very often used in your coming of age thematic elements, right? So that would be like Saint Sir Nicholas was asking about Harry Potter. That would be the kind of Harry Potter themes, right? So in the final book, the message of Harry Potter was don't seek power. Instead, do what you can for your friendships. And basically, like uh it's kind of the self-sacrificing thing, right? No greater love has one man for another than that he yields his life. And that is what that's what the message there was. And it's a moral kind of growing into adulthood kind of themes, things that we want children to learn and to be part of society, essentially. Um, and so then you've got political philosophy, right? So Machiavelli is probably our most famous political philosopher. Everybody knows about him. And so books like Dune and A Song of Ice and Fire and so on, they lean into political philosophy and critiquing political systems or re-looking at political systems and so on. And then you have like war philosophy, right? And what does war mean to us? So this builds on the kind of like, is war justified? How do you conduct war? Is it important to obey some kind of rules in war? All of that, which can also form a part of your kind of political philosophy. So each of these drives different kind of themes. So my my take on it is depending on the thematic elements of your story. I think that you should read philosophers who address that question. Whether you read them directly, like philosophers directly, or whether you read people who follow those philosophies in novels, right? And whether you like consume that, because ultimately you are going to want to look at what is going on in that field and address all of that as a thematic question uh, in your book. And I think that will make your stories or your gaming world, if you're running a role-playing gaming world, right? It'll make your world richer to understand your uh, your theme at a very deep level, right? And those philosophers in that same field will help you understand that. So, um, Martin is very philosophically pessimistic. You are right, Elliot. Elliot on Wheels made a great comment there. Um, he is super pessimistic. Um, Him and Joe Abercrombie, oh my goodness. Joe Abercrombie thinks like humans are terrible. He thinks there is no hope for us, if you judge by his books. Um, so because he also writes kind of political political systemic critiques and so on, and very, very pessimistic. As you know, if you've read like First Law, it does not end happy. um, Saint Sir Nicholas, nobody said philosophers aren't hypocrites. um, Sure, Harry Potter does have a theme of teen gets superpowers and it is cool, but the whole thing with the Horcruxes and so on is like, if you go looking for this power, then you will bring yourself a cropper. It's actually this philosophy is one of those, don't go beyond your boundaries. Oh, I'm gonna sound like a blue-haired socialist. I'm sorry. I know I am. I know what I sound like when I say this, but it is one of those, like, stay in your box, messages. He got powers, right? He got birthright powers, and that's good. That is the path your life should follow. That is your destined powers. But Tom Tom Riddle went looking for power. He went looking for the Horcruxes, and he split his soul, destroyed himself, lived, all of that kind of thing. Like, he went outside of his box to go looking for power. And that was the whole question as well with Harry Potter when he gave up looking for those three items, the three items that would destroy um, Riddle. It's like, you know, if he gave up looking for them, and that is him staying inside his box, right? He was set on this box by his older mentor, and he is following the path of his mentor, and that is the good and right and just thing to do that will lead to him overcoming the theme of the story and winning. I I know what that sounds like. Um, but but regardless, we're getting a bit off track here. The thing is, the it this intersection of philosophy and world building, as Wu Wei says in the chat, it is a very critical part of building your world. If you want to explore themes, right? If you want to really like ask those questions, those deep questions like, is war justified? When is war justified? You know, when is murder justified? Is it ever murder? Is it ever justified? Are there people that do we ever have the right to say, I believe the world would be better off without you in it? You know, and that is like that is a question that goes very deep. It's a question Jacqueline Carey explored in Kashil's Avatar, where in the end, uh, Fedre was faced with that exact question. Like, she was like, "This dude is evil," and she didn't kill him on a battlefield. It wasn't a massive fight. She just assassinated him, essentially. Um, and it was the right thing to do. Everything about this was it was the right thing to do, but it is a morally ambiguous question. It is a hecking big question to ask. So, and understanding that that is a question that you want your world to answer is very important when you're setting up your world, so that you construct the world so that it helps you ask that question, right? Your magic system helps you ask the question. Your cultures help you ask the question. Your characters have sufficient moral framework that they can look at a question like that and come up with an answer. Okay. And that you can only really build into a world on purpose, right? You are not going to stumble into a perfect world, that into a perfect theme by randomly building a variety of bits and pieces. It's a question of um, deciding what your thematic elements are, understanding the philosophical arguments that guide those elements, and building it in. How do you differentiate between religion and philosophy? So I don't distinguish between religion and philosophy as such. Religion is in a lot of ways very philosophical. Like Kierkegaard, who I referenced earlier. Kierkegaard wrote moral philosophy, but it's also deeply, deeply tied into his Christianity. There's a modern philosopher that I like to read, uh, uh, Barn no, Han, who wrote he there was an amazing book he wrote about the importance of ritual and how much we've lost as our various cultures by losing ritual and focusing so much on productivity. Um, and, their religion is a core part of their philosophy, and many of our philosophies of the past come out of religion, come out of the writings of various monks and nuns and priests and so on, here in the West as well as in the East. Confucianism is a philosophy, but it shapes a whole worldview much the same way that Christianity does or that Islam does. So they are so close, especially in fantasy. They are so close that I would argue separating them does you more harm than good, in my opinion. Um, Saint St. Nicholas asks, "What do you think when the elements of the world seem to contradict them? Like if kindness and justice are themes, but the heroes are only able to keep going due to, say, arcane rage spells." So this is the problem with what I call thematic telling versus thematic showing. And I get so frustrated sometimes with this. Like, you will have a hero talk all high-mindedly about kindness and justice and whatever, and then they'll wade in with a sword and, slaughter half a village or whatever. And it's like, okay, your mouth says one thing, your actions tell me something else entirely. And that is worth thinking about. So there's two ways this can go. Either the author hasn't thought about it. Yeah. Either the author does not realize that thematically the actions of the character contradict the words coming out the character's mouth, which is possible. Or the author has thought about it and the character is in a state of um, cognitive dissonance. So they say that they want kindness and justice and yada, 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 but they resort to arcane rage spells every second moment. And that creates cognitive dissonance, right? And that is an interesting theme all by itself, is how do you reconcile those two things? How do you bring those things into reconciliation? Um, so, you know. um, okay. So that's at the meta level of our philosophy and using philosophy to design that meta level, right? So, for example, With Sangwheel Chronicles, my very big picture theme is about self-determination and destiny, and how there is no destiny, or is there a destiny, right? This is the question. Is there such a thing as destiny, as higher power, as meaningfulness, all of those kinds of things? Or do we determine all meaning in our lives? So that's my very, very high level question. But I have all kinds of sub themes in it, like, you know, are you justified in taking a life? What does the pursuit of power mean? Are you justified in holding other people's agency for yourself in a political sense? You know, and so I built the world that asks these questions. I built a world that has people who believe in destiny and people who don't believe in destiny. And I built forces that manipulate them on either side. And I built a magic system that centers around questions of power and future and cost. Um, because that is, you know, what I want the world to ultimately answer when I finally get there. Um, so um, okay. Then let's talk about in-world philosophy. Okay, so this is slightly different from your meta philosophy. Okay, so your meta philosophy is about your theme, it's about getting your world to ask the question that you wanted to ask, right? And that basically comes down to, if you want to do a political critique, creating a system that is that political system and then showing kind of why it's bad, the way that Herbert did with Dune, the way that Martin does with A Song of Ice and Fire. Um, if you want to do a moral question of like the pursuit of power, Tolkien actually does this really well with Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit carries the ring. The Hobbit is the average guy, the normal guy, not the highfalutin, powerful elves, not the mighty men, not the wizard. The Hobbit is the one that carries the ring, showing the kind of power of the common man and the importance of the common man. And right at the end, the importance of friendship and helping, that how even a someone as good as Frodo can get corrupted by the ring, and how we all need friends, with Sam helping him bring the whole thing over the line. So understanding your meta philosophy, understanding the arguments that have been made by philosophers in the field, both the counter argument and the argument in favor of, will help you create a richer thematic world. Okay? And it is important to read philosophers who disagree with your point of view, because a theme is only as strong as the counter arguments. Okay, you cannot just present straw man arguments and expect people to kind of cheer for a theme, right? You need to present both sides with a strong case. And that, and that strong case is what makes the theme impactful. So read both sides of your argument to understand what arguments have been made before, and then make your own argument. Okay. In world philosophy is about what your characters use to create their cultural framework, their moral framework, their understanding of politics, their understanding of power, their understanding of relationships. Okay. And it is critical, and it is pitifully neglected by so many world builders. Like the philosophy that defines your cultures are super, super important. Now, often you can have religion take the place of that philosophy. Okay. So you can have the religion that they follow be kind of the core of their philosophy. but it will still be a richer world if you have a look at how philosophical thought, especially moral philosophy, has developed in our world, and therefore how it might develop in your culture. And by that I mean things like, you know, um, arguments about why you shouldn't murder people, what kind of marriage you should have. Why is that guy in charge? Why not this guy? Why do we use democracy instead of monarchy? Why do we have sortition? If we were back in ancient Athens, they used sortition to choose, the executives of their city. So why did they use sortition? Because they had philosophers who made arguments for it. Why did the Song dynasty have exams that people sat through in order to become an imperial bureaucrat? Because there was a whole school of Confucianism that, spoke about the importance of merit and, philosophy and all of these kind of bureaucratic importances, combined with, your place in the world, your relationship with others, and all of these kinds of details. I'm sorry, my to anybody of the Eastern schools or the Indian schools of philosophy, I've mostly studied Western philosophy, mostly continental philosophy. So, um, my knowledge is what it is. um, yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Elliot. That is indeed, there is a question in one of my books where the character asks, is it worth saving the world if this is the price that we have to pay? Um, so yeah. So the thing is, most people can't name the philosophers that gave rise to our current thoughts on morality and so on. But there are people who absolutely can. And those moral philosophies, those writings are underpinnings of what we are taught as children. It's what we observe in our cultures, and it becomes ingrained in us as adults. And I'm not saying you have to write it. Don't misunderstand me here. You know my approach to world building is build what you need when you need it. I am not saying that you should write a philosophical treatise, for every culture. But understanding kind of the evolution of how a culture came to where they are will help you. Okay. So I have a culture that has triadic marriage, for example. Triadic marriage in this case means that two men marry one woman. Okay. And the reason why they do that is kind of complicated. They've got a magic system that supports it, as well as they live in the desert. So it takes a lot of labor to keep a family, in any kind of easy state. Um, and because their magic system allows for control over down to the cellular level over things like, the sex of the child and things like that, um, they they can control things like having more men than women, right? Available within their culture. So they've built this whole like triadic marriage around it, and they have philosophers that speak about the importance of balance in a marriage and in a household, right? How important it is to have two male energies, the father and the protector, and they split these two roles. The father is the creator, he's the nurturer, he works with a mother, they have children, they have the children, it's their children, that is the right hand husband and the wife. And then the destroyer is the protector. He's the left-hand husband, and his role is to guard the family, to sometimes leave the family and bring back food. And he's that kind of like the kind of further out warrior. So they've actually made a split of the male role into these two distinctions. And that is that they've got a whole like moral framework around how important it is to have this three-sided balance, and how without this three-sided balance you're uneven and you run the risk of the family falling apart, and all of these kind of moral approaches. um so and I went through that exercise because the triadic marriage is so not not what we think of first, right? So we're very used to kind of two people. I can't remember what it's called, the normal marriage. And so I wanted to make sure that there was philosophical support for this, and that the world supported this as well as their magic system, and that I thought about certain physical things like this kind of marriage does mean that there has to be more men than women in their cultures, because otherwise it just won't work, right? Otherwise you're going to have a whole bunch of women who don't get married, which would be very weird, given that women are still um the mothers. So you're not going to have a culture that survives if you neglect a whole bunch of fertile people and you don't marry them. That would make no sense. So um so and that kind of thought about your culture is a really critical part of building your culture. Understanding your culture's ideology, where it comes from, and how that changes their worldview is so, so, so important. So I'm just going to take a quick glance at the comments. Tide of Queera says, I'm making a society of essentially moon elves, that leadership was based on the phases of the moon. Yeah, so I would change. So that is, see, that's perfect. Like your leadership shifts between phases of the moon. So for these people, the moon is a critical component of their lives. They probably draw some kind of power from the moon, or they believe they draw power from the moon. Either could work, you know. And so the shift of the moon is how they change power. And that ties their religion or their magic or their approach to philosophy into their actual political system, which makes complete sense. Um, Saint Sir Nicholas said something else is a philosophy probably should have some sort of actual benefits. Since it's true, it should work right. Ah, okay. So you would think that is true. You would think that you need some kind of benefits, but no. So I follow religion for breakfast, right? Which is a great channel. If you're interested in philosophy and religion, you should follow him. Um, and uh, there's a very, very interesting study that they've done recently. I know about the study from other channels, but he's the most recent and the biggest channel that spoke about this. A religion succeeding, like a religion carrying on through generations, is determined for the most part, is determined by children observing their parents engaging in high cost actions to stay in the religion. Okay. And the example that he used is the Mandalorian religion, right? The one that we met in the first season, where you keep your helmet on all the time, right? And the thing is, there's no benefit to keeping your helmet on. You don't gain anything from it. Yeah. But the moment you enter that sect, you see that your father or your mother, whoever you're assigned to, they do this. They take their food, they walk away from others, they eat in private, paying this cost in order to be part of the religion, of the sect. So because you see them pay the cost the whole time, you go, okay, um, it must be worth it to engage in this action. And so the sect propagates because people believe that it's worth it, right? Whether it is or it isn't depends on how much you take from it as an individual, right? How much you take from the philosophy's teaching, from the or from the sect's teach, or from the religion's teaching, whatever it is that you're talking about. And that is a question between you and your heart. You know what I mean? Like I cannot answer for you whether it is worth it. Um, that is a question every person must answer for themselves. But what ensures propagation is high cost actions by adults who teach children. Um, so, if in case you were planning on building a religion, build in some high cost actions, and your religion is likely to stand 1,000 years. So, um, so philosophies don't propagate in exactly the same way religions do. You're right, JLCD4ZM, because philosophies aren't generally institutions in and of themselves. So religions are institutions. I think somebody said that in the chat, might have been Werbus. Uh, Religion is philosophy plus institution. Um, and philosophies by themselves, like Plato's Republic, or like Machiavelli's The Prince, or even The War, Clausewitz on war and so on. Um, these are ideas, okay? And ideas do propagate, but they don't propagate as much as religions do, because religions come with this institution which has these high value costs associated with it. And you can actually see the difference very clearly illustrated there, because your religion propagates through institution and through the cost that people pay to be members of this institution, whereas your philosophies only propagate, through the strength of the ideas that people take from them or don't take from them. Because Plato had to be translated like a bazillion times in order to reach us in the modern world. The same for Confucius's writings, or his student. Man, I did research on Confucianism for the Chinese video, but anyway, so these ideas had to be good enough to be translated like many, many times over. So they had to provide benefit probably to, both the elite and the non-elite, in order to be propagated. But institutions propagate through high cost actions. So, um, so why follow an idea only if it hurts? Sometimes people follow the idea because it hurts. Um, Wirbus, too many females. Yeah. So that's one of the things you have to think about if you start going like with triadic marriage or anything like that. You have to think about like the impact that it has on disproportionality in the sexes. Um, Karamalidov says maybe there was a benefit at the past and the philosophy stayed. Absolutely. Um, Yes, Confucianism does have a lot of branches in it. Well, I mean, it's an ancient philosophy, right? Of course, it has a lot of branches. Like humans can take the curtains were blue and turn it into a debate. Like, of course, of course, they created a million branches of any given philosopher. You can you can get different philosophies of anyone. Existentialism, nihilism has got like 5 different branches associated with it. You know, um, like there are all very different. Yeah, if more than 3 people are following any given idea, it'll be different. Right there. So, and that's another thing to remember is people interpret the same thing differently. People take different messages out of the same text, and that is not a bug, okay? That doesn't mean that you're wrong or you're right. That is what you take out of the text. And it's the same for people in your world. They will read a philosophy, and one person will take one thing out of that philosophy, and another person will take another thing out of that philosophy. And they might end up disagreeing while quoting the same text. So I've actually recently been massively editing my work in progress for my second series in Sangwheel, which will be Sangwheel Tales. And in it, I have I have kind of slavery as a core theme, slavery and freedom, and what does it mean? What does freedom mean? You know, and so I have a continent, or I have an empire where they have actually emancipated people. Like, they no longer have slavery, okay? And they did this through a whole series of philosophies where they changed the authority of the emperor away from it's divinely mandated to it's what gives our society structure. And so the emperor gives us structure and in return accepts structure, and that is kind of our collective approach. But they did not allow for the freedom of mages. Their mages are all still very, very heavily controlled, you know. So mages can't cast without permission of like a priest, and like there's a whole like thing about it. And there are people who now want to free the mages, right? And there's philosophies that support it. And then there are people who are like, yeah, but okay, but the reality of the situation is a mage can fireball you. So we give them freedom. Doesn't that deny everybody else freedom? Right. So and that becomes a very interesting philosophical question. Like, if if we had people in this world today that could fireball other people, that were so dramatically more powerful than a standard human, what would that mean for the concept of freedom? You know, if somebody can that easily destroy freedom of others, and that kind of is a very interesting question. And Saint Sir Nicholas, you are correct. The wizards would have become kings. Wizards were kings in previous empire, right? They were kings. They were under control and so on. So it is kind of a whole thing, right? That is kind of the whole thing. No, what happened was these people figured out a way to make a device that could that could help them control the mages, and basically turned the mages into like a controlled population. But it is an interesting philosophical thought, and it's one that I'm putting into the book. You know, what does it mean for freedom of everybody, not just for the mage, who's obviously, I mean, mages right now are the ones in chains, right? So our sympathy very naturally lies with them. But what does it mean for common people if there are these powerful guys? You know, it comes down to that feudalism question again. You know, so when things went crazy in Europe and in Japan, but in Europe, and the feudal lords started arising, their kind of implicit social contract was, I will protect you. But who will you protect me from? I'll protect you from other people like me, right? It essentially created a feudalism system because, um, a man on a horse with armor is going to beat the snot out of a peasant. I'll give you an example. The first crusade was two crusades, right? It was the peasants' crusade, and then it was the princes' crusade. And the peasants' crusade was a whole bunch of people wearing nothing but cloth, with like some cudgels and the conviction of their faith, and they arrived in the Holy Land and they got slaughtered. They just the Seljuks slaughtered them, and then sometime later the princes arrived, and then there was a real military contest. So it is kind of that principle, that is kind of the we saw that principle play out in our world with effectively knights taking not knights necessarily, but like armored warriors and their ability to dominate um, the normal population and creating and the kind of like imbalance that creates. So um, yeah. Okay. So, long story short, for that particular setup, I did actually write down a whole bunch of philosophy, like steps, because I was making so many cultural changes that I needed like reference points, and I needed people to be able to argue using using arguments that they would say like, no, but according to this guy and according to this guy, and what about this and what about that. Um, and but I didn't write in full. Like I didn't write a whole treatise. What I said is like, okay, so the philosophical thoughts that I'm going to approach is like Thomas Hobbes. I need a Thomas Hobbes like philosopher. So I make a Thomas Hobbes like philosopher. Then I need a little bit later, I need a guy who writes about freedom. I need an Adam Smith to talk about like the economic impact of slavery and that kind of thing. So I built kind of this whole kind of philosophical framework, slowly but surely leading to emancipation, and then the question of majors. So, um, and but you only really needed to go that deep if you're directly going to be having those kinds of arguments between characters, which is not at all common, right? Like, I mean, I am writing a specific story about freedom and slavery and the impact thereof, and so that's why it's all there. So, so that is not common. Gary, it's good to see you. You are very late. But there will be a replay available after this. Okay, so questions. Uh, ask questions. I don't know. Ask me anything. Um, do you think the mages would inherently have a different philosophy from regular people? I think so. And that's one of the things I'm working into the story is like what the free mages think. But it's also every culture in my world handles mages differently. Like in the empire, it's a magocracy. Mages are in charge. And not this empire, a different empire. The empire of Lumiaron. It's a magocracy, the mages are in charge. In the empire of Imoven, mages are controlled. In Kisangi, mages are all in the religion. And the religion is kind of like the Catholic Church of Europe. It's a the religion is a controlling factor on the continent without directly being in charge. So they've got this kind of like soft power relationship with the kings. and all mages are just automatically in the priesthood. So, so yeah. Um, uh, it seems to need a lot of exposition if you want the audience to understand them, to not be lost inside the debate. So, yes and no. So, I wonder if I have it here. Let me see. I think I can give you an example. Let me just check that it's actually on this on this machine, because it might not be. Sangwheel Tales. Uh, yeah. Um, so you don't necessarily have to go to an enormous amount of like exposition. So here, for example, in this little section, I just have a character who is talking to a priest, right? The priest has a mage with him, and the mage is under control. And then they're in a carriage, and the priest is currently like dragging the character off elsewhere through political shenanigans and so on. Um, and the character has her son with her, Kalon, who has just woken up in the carriage, and he kind of reaches across and tries to touch the mage's quasuls, which are the things that control the mage. And then the priest says, it says to the mage, tell the boy why he should not touch it. The mage kept her eyes fixed on the carriage floor, her posture rigid, her voice devoid of inflection. The kwasul is the tether of my salvation. Without it, the magic in my blood would turn to a lawless, burning fire. It ensures I draw on the Elamar of the unseen only when the holy Tearborn grant permission, sparing me the agony of my own unhuman nature. Her eyes flashed upward briefly. To touch a kwasul for anyone other than a Tearborn is therefore to attempt the usurpation of their holy power. And that basically is like, it encapsulates what mages are taught. And I don't need to give the reader any more than that. I think any reader can read that and understand like what mages are taught. And then Waini's reaction to this, the character's reaction to this, a chill crawled through Waini. Of course, mages were restricted from using their power willy-nilly. They had to be, for how else could ordinary people exist in the face of such power? And yet, hearing the maid speak so reverently of the chains on her wrist, of her wavering humanity, turned Wayne's stomach. So you get kind of a reaction to that philosophy. And then Wayne and the priest get into a little bit of back and forth about what it means to be human in their culture. Now, these are questions and things like we don't need much exposition to understand. We don't need to know the names of the philosophers. We don't These things are not important. They're important to me as the world builder to understand, but they're not important to the reader. The reader only needs to grasp the concepts, and the concepts are not hard to communicate at a high level. So, um, and also, like Wirbus says, philosophy is a good spice. It's not a core meat unless you're like one of those philosophy novelists like Camus or so on. Saint Sir Nicholas says thoughts on how to have a good or becoming character who starts with an evil philosophy like Drist. Okay, so when you have a character that breaks with their culture, there generally needs to be some level of why, right? Um, so they might have an inciting incident that cracks their what they've been taught, because they will not have been taught that they are "Mwahaha" evil, right? They will have been taught that their way is the right way. It is the it is the way that glorifies the God in the right manner, right? And they will believe that. And it's I think it's important to both understand that and to write characters from that perspective, from a perspective that you don't necessarily agree with as a human, but they would, right? But maybe they're not fully comfortable with it. Maybe it doesn't, like it doesn't attract them. But this is what they've been taught, and this is what their culture's been taught, and they think there's something wrong with them. And then you give them an inciting incident, a moment of cracking, right? And then you crack them away from their culture. Maybe they get taken away from their culture. Maybe they meet somebody who's not of their culture. And slowly, slowly, it kind of breaks through. So I recently reread Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea trilogy. And I don't know if you've ever read Tombs of Atewan, but Tombs of Atewan is a very interesting exploration of that, of breaking with your culture, of breaking with your philosophy. In Tombs of Atewan, you have this girl who's been told that she is the reincarnation of the priestess, and she's taken to live in the tombs of Atewan, and she is supposed to be the high priestess, and that comes with a whole lot of duties that she doesn't particularly like, but she does them because she's been taught, like, this is her role, this is her destiny. And well, then Sparrowhawk comes and he says to her, but essentially he forms a break, and then she and Sparrowhawk talk and talk and talk, and then basically in the end she makes different choices, right? Um, it's a really old book, so I'm not sure I'm spoiling it for anyone. But if you want an interesting philosophical exploration of breaking with your culture and changing your identity, um, Tombs of Atewan is a great book for that topic. So yeah. um, Gary, I hope your daughters enjoyed the pool. Uh, James, good to see you. Um, I'm so happy to see you here. Um, Saint Sir Nicholas asks, in your world, are all wizards the same but different styles, or are there biomancers, deathmancers, druids? So in Blood and Bloom in Las Vegas, which all of you should go check out on Kickstarter. There's it's my urban fantasy book that I'm launching the Kickstarter for on 10 July. So go check that out on Kickstarter under Starving Writer Studio. Blood and Bloom in Las Vegas is the title you're looking for. And in there, I've got different styles of mages. So I've got druids, I've got people who make magic with sumi art, and so on. And how I do it there is magic is fueled with fairy dust, and that is what provides the power. And then the different disciplines of the world, the different ways that people create various forms of art, or that people write spells and so on, that gives form to the power, so that creates the shape of the spell. In Sangwil Chronicles, I have three different I've got two flavors of power: creative power and destructive power. And then different cultures have got different ways of flowing that power through them. So in the Empire of Lumiaron, people learn one way, and that is the only channel that is available to them through their body. So they are shadow mages or blade mages, or so they've got like this one spell that they use, this one discipline that they can use for magic. So that's in the Empire. Then in Imoven, they use ruins and then infuse the ruins with magic, and that is their approach to spell casting. And then in on the religion side, in Kisangi, their prayers are spells, and they can call upon the gods to do certain things. Basically, they can call upon the creating god, the right hand god, to heal, and they can call on the destructive god to wield destructive powers, and they can call upon the goddess to mingle the two. So that's kind of my approach. So I've got different cultures that have different approaches. Um, uh, yep, Sparta was a very brutally repressive culture with regards to the slaves. They did a whole thing. Um, um, all right. So that was goodness. We've been yapping for an hour and a half. I hope you guys have enjoyed the conversation. I hope my long rambling thoughts on philosophy uh, rang some bells and helped you think about your world building in a way that you know um, helps you build out a world. Uh, Thoughts on how to introduce a whole new religion into a story. So, do you mean a new religion starts, Saint Sir Nicholas? Like, as in, there's an actual, like, a new religion that starts. Um, so I would look at probably at like how Christianity started, right? So there was the inciting incident of the crucifixion, and then there was Paul. Paul and Peter really were the two who really kind of started spreading the message. But then what happened was it got adopted by Rome, and it kind of blossomed from there. So I would take it in a step-by-step process, depending on how deeply you want to entrench the religion. An inciting incident, right? Which it can be anything. It's basically your divine inciting incident, your moment of divinity, your spark. Then you need disciples that spread the philosophy, the word, and so on. And then you need entrenchment in institution, so state entrenchment. Um, so that would be probably my approach. But like, I would also take a look at how Buddhism actually, Buddhism's spreading a lot the same way. Now that I think, like, Buddhism is essentially like the prince guy um, had the inciting incident of realizing that people suffer, and he meditated and he went to explore the world and so on, and then he taught other people, and then there were disciples, and then it became entrenched. It became entrenched in institutions. So yeah, I guess spark, disciples, entrenchment is kind of your three-step process. Maybe I'll do a video on that. That might be interesting to do a video on, like a how do religions come to be, and how you can do that. Because they all, but the thing is, all religions start with those philosophical ideas, right? Buddhism's Buddhism is the path of karma and of like achieving enlightenment and so on. Christianity's philosophy is the philosophy um you are washed free of sin, and no greater love. We must all love each other. We must all, like, that is the core principle of Christianity. No greater love have man than that he would give up his life for his brother. That kind of core principle. Um, and um, I'd have to study it. I'm not going to spout off on other religions that I can't remember at the top of my head, because I might get them wrong. But the point is, all religions have core tenets of faith, right? And those tenets of faith is the philosophy that originally formed. So you have your divine incident, you have philosophies, philosophies, entrenchment in an institution. So um, be kind of how I would approach it. And obviously they do draw, on like Christianity wasn't the first to have the golden rule. You know what I mean? Like they do draw on existing philosophies and thoughts and so on and incorporate them. Like all of human culture is the sum of what has gone before, right? We it is not don't misunderstand me. We are not in cycles. We do not repeat history. Any of that nonsense is nonsense. Okay, but um, what has happened before deeply impacts us in the ideas that we carry forward. It wouldn't have been possible for philosophers today if there hadn't been philosophers in the past that had, the ideas of Plato and Aristotle. And there's a church father I'm forgetting. I dislike him, but I dislike him because of his opinion on women, which I shouldn't blame him for. It was that time, but still, he's like, women are weeds, and you'd be better off if men could have babies and you didn't have to interact with women at all. So, my opinion of him is like, oh, really? Well, you fuck off then. But, he did have some fairly, he did have good philosophical ideas. So I read him for the value I can get out of his philosophical ideas, even if I think he was a fucking cunt. So yeah. um, so uh, some religions like Shinto are basically built from disparate traditions, superstitions. Yeah, by a regime to solidify its claim. Yeah, so Shinto was actually constructed by the state. Drawing together different ideas. So it's and schisms. Do not forget schisms. Schisms are enormous fun. And your religion should have schisms because everybody schisms. um, so yeah, might have been Augustine actually. I think it might have been Augustine. Um, yeah, 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 probably was Augustine. He was the one who said women, why does a woman mature faster than a man? For the same reason a weed matures faster than a rose. So you can fuck off is what you can do. Yeah. um, yeah. Anyway, guys, it has been a pleasure. It has been a great stream, long stream. Um, I am glad that you had fun. We will have another one in 2 weeks. Next week, there will be a compilation. No, next week is World Building Blueprints Day. So next week, there will be World Building Blueprints, where we will do, I think I'm doing majors. So it'll be like university level education of majors and institutions around wizardry and all those fun things. So look out for that podcast dropping next week Saturday, and Tuesday will be the iceberg of Royal Fantasy Courts. So which I just finished editing today. So members will be getting that tomorrow when I've uploaded it. So, and everybody else, it'll drop on Tuesday. And yeah, I will see you in 2 weeks. Have an amazing weekend. And thank you very much, all of you, for being here. Let me just make 100% sure I haven't missed any questions. No. All right. Bye, guys.